Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf and to another recent reads on Sundays. This time, normally, like make a whole sentence that makes sense, maybe. I blame it on the heat because even though technically it's fall, it's the 10th of September, we are in the middle of a 90 Fahrenheit, 30 plus Celsius heat wave here in Germany or all over Europe. I don't know. Anyway, so I blame it on the heat. But what I wanted to say, normally the recent reads, obviously, as the name says, is mostly about the books that I've finished. But because of the 30 books in 30 days challenge, which I did, yes, I finished 30 books in 31 days. Actually, the last book on the last day of August. I didn't finish more than one book that I haven't talked about yet, even though it's already the 10th of September. But I'm working on a couple of more books, so it's mostly about my current reads. I mean, who cares? Just get on with it. Anyway, the book that I have finished still in August, and that I hadn't talked about yet, is an essay collection, Susan Sontag, on women. And the collection is, does it say? Yeah, edited by David Reef, and that's her son. I read this together with Kathleen from Kathleen and Reads, and I will leave a link, of course, to her channel down below, and she already reviewed it. So have a look also at what she thinks about the book, because it was her first Susan Sontag. This is a collection of essays, obviously, around the topic of women and feminism. All of the essays, it's essays and an interview, are from the 1970s. Obviously, Susan Sontag, who was born in the 1930s, she died 10 years ago or something already, so it's not recent essays, and it's also not essays that haven't been published before, but they are collected for this topic. I really liked it. I mean, Susan Sontag is one of my leading ladies, one of my heroes, so I really appreciated these essays on feminism. And there were a couple of essays, or rather the interview, it was not my favorite. So the first couple of essays I really, really loved. And it had the typical Susan Sontag, I don't care what anybody else thinks attitude. She was a feminist, for sure, but she was not a mainstream. She was not mainstream anything, and certainly also not a mainstream feminist. And her the first essays are about the double standard of aging, and then the second essay, and that was those two were my favorites. The third world of women was actually a response to a questionnaire sent to her and 5 other female authors by a Spanish language magazine, and about questions like, at what stage now is the struggle of women's liberation, and she gives long answers to these. What meaning does the idea of women's liberation have for you? So these 2 essays alone, the first one about aging and how we look at women and aging and men and aging, and how Susan Sontag interprets feminism and what should change and how it should change, they are worth it. And if you are a Susan Sontag fan, this is, of course, a necessary addition to your collection. But even if you're not familiar with her work, but if you want to read essays written in the 70s, so second wave feminism, but with a really unique point of view, and sometimes even a point of view that you will have a look at, like, okay, and then think about it. So that's always what I love about Susan Sontag, and so it was worth it. And the buddy read with Kathleen, of course, was fantastic, and it's always nice, especially with this type of book, to discuss it with somebody. So this one I finished. Oh, and it was published just earlier this year in this format, in this collection. And then on to the books. Let me check my list. That I'm currently reading. And there's one that I've already started some time ago. I always have one book, mostly non-fiction, no, always non-fiction, that I just read bits and pieces. I call it my bathroom book because I read it when I'm in the bath, or when I'm, just having a couple of minutes. So it's a very slow going book. It takes me months to read it. And I always pick a book, like I said, nonfiction, that is easy to chop up in shorter pieces without losing the thread. And my bathroom book at the moment is Jill Lepore, If Then, How the Simulmatics Corporation Invented the Future. And this book was published in 2020. This was a recommendation from Heidi from my reading life. She really liked this. I had never read Jill Lepore, also not her more famous books, These Truths and This America. She is a professor of American history at Harvard, and she also writes for the New Yorker. And this, like I said, this is my first encounter with her, and so far I'm 2/3 in. It doesn't look like it, but at the end there are a lot of notes, many notes. So I'm 2/3 in, and I really love this. I had no idea about this corporation, who is the first, at least as far as I understand, the first corporation that tries to predict behavior. So if we do that, then people will react in that and that way. And of course, it's important for political polls, how you get across your message, and that is fascinating. But for me, what makes this book also really valuable is, as a non-US connoisseur. I mean, I'm not, I'm European. Let's make it easy. Like, again, the heat. I'm European, so I'm familiar with, the broad outline of US history, but certainly no details. And this is starting in the 1950s, and then we get the elections, Kennedy election. So there is a lot of politics explained in the book, because the if-then thing had to do with politics and elections, and that part explaining how Kennedy got nominated, how Nixon got elected. That is really interesting to me, because there are details in that book that I had no idea, and it's fascinating. So if you are interested in politics, but not in a history of the American 1940s, 50s or 60s, but a bit of a different angle, I think this is a perfect book. It's sometimes a little bit maybe too detailed on the simulmatics shenanigans, but it's worth it. So I'm really looking forward to finishing this. I hope before the year is out, I will have finished this one, my slow book. And then I started just this weekend a couple of books. The first one is also nonfiction, Monsters by Claire Dederer, A Fan's Dilemma. I hauled this book, I think, in the spring. This was published this year, if I'm not, earlier this year. And I'm reading this with Chris from one half of the book Cougars. So it's our first buddy read, and I'm really excited about it. And I'm also excited about the book. And these are essays. The author is a book critic, essayist, and reporter. It's so tiny. had to get rid of my glasses to read it. But I haven't read her before, so this is my first book by her, and it's essays about various artists that she admires, like Roman Polanski, but who have, to say it euphemistically, questionable personal made questionable personal choices, criminal, like child molesting and stuff like that, and how to deal with the monster whose art is admirable, at least for Claire Dederer. So I'm really looking forward to reading this. I have read the first 3 pages, so I can't say anything more than that. And the other 2 books are buddy reads with Adam from Memento Mori, and we are taking kind of a break from our quest to read Le Guin's entire body of work, more or less. I will come to that in a second. And our pick now for September is Flannery O'Connor's Wise Blood, which was published in 1952. I have read 1, maybe 2 or 3 short stories of her, not the most famous one, but I have never read a novel, and this book is on my 1001 women authors or books by women authors that I have to read before I die list. It's a reread for Adam, so that's also interesting because, for me, it's almost my first Flannery O'Connor, and certainly the first in English, in the original language. But for him, it's a reread. So this is her debut novel, and it's a story of Hazel Motes, a 22-year-old caught in an unending struggle against his inborn desperate fate. Okay, he falls under the spell of a street preacher and the preacher's daughter, and it's supposed to be an ironic look at faith because Flannery O'Connor was a devout Catholic. So that's all I know. And Adam just told me, I didn't know that there's also a John Huston movie made out of this book in the 1970s. So I will try to see whether I can watch that on Netflix or Amazon Prime or something. And again, I've just read the first maybe 3 pages. So nothing more to say about it, what I think about that. And when I said that we are taking a break from Le Guin, our quest to read Le Guin's work, kind of, is because we are starting the collected poems. That was actually a gift from Adam for my birthday. And it's dense. I mean, it's 700 or 800 pages. Without the notes, it's about 700 and something pages. Let me check. 700, just over 700 pages. So we're certainly not reading this, starting and then back cover to cover. But Adam's suggestion was to just read the first collection, which is about 20 pages or something. And the first collection is called paper so thin, Wild Angels. So we will read the poems in this collection, Wild Angels, over the course of, a couple of weeks. So there's no two poems a week and then check in and then talk about them once we finish them, or if any of us has something to say. I'm, as you know, not a very experienced poetry reader, except for German poetry, but I always try to find a new engagement with poetry, and buddy reads that's always helping me, to get more of a grip on poems. I have never read Ursula Le Guin's poem, so I have no idea what to expect. That's, again, come to think of it, not entirely true, because sometimes in her fiction, in her novels, there are songs or poems included, but I have never read them solo, so I'm really, and I haven't started yet, so I'm really kind of excited about how I read her fiction, I read her nonfiction, and how she is approaching poetry. So anyway, so those is the one book that I have finished, still in August. I haven't finished a book yet in September, like I said, and the 4 books, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm working on. I'm also reading books for the Booktubeprize, but I can't talk about them anyway, so I will do that once this last round is finalized and we have our 3 winners. They will be announced the beginning of October. Thank you very much for watching. As always, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to your comments, and I'll talk to you all soon in the next one.